Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
All right, ready to dive into some serious history. We're tackling the civil rights movement today, specifically those powerhouse organizations that made it all happen.
It's really fascinating stuff. We're talking about the NAACP, SCLC, SNCC, the Nation of Islam, each one unique, each one fighting for the same cause, but in totally different ways.
Yeah, and you've brought together a ton of information about them, so let's dig in. You're interested in how their approaches differed, right? Like, not just what they did, but how they went about it.
Exactly. And also what their impact was in the long run. It's like, how did these different strategies actually change things? What were the lasting effects? It's pretty amazing to think about.
Absolutely. So should we start with the NAACP? They're often called the legal architects of the movement, right? All about using the courts to fight segregation.
Right. They were like, okay, we're going to take this fight to the courts, use the legal system to dismantle this whole system of segregation. And the thing is, they had been at it for a while, long before the civil rights movement really gained momentum in the 50s and 60s.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize they had been around that long.
Yeah, they were founded in 1909, so they had already been fighting for decades, laying the groundwork for what was to come. They were playing the long game, and it took some serious dedication.
That's wild. Talk about commitment. So I know they tackled a ton of issues, but their most famous case has to be Brown v. Board of Education. Right. That was a game changer.
Totally. I mean, everyone was watching that case. And when the Supreme Court ruled that separate but equal was unconstitutional, at least when it came to public schools, man, it was huge. It overturned that whole precedent set by Plessy v. Ferguson back in 1896. Talk about a shakeup.
Right. It's those moments in history that you just know are going to echo through the years. And even now, all these years later, we're still grappling with the issue of equality in education. Brown v. Board might have been a major victory, but the fight's definitely not over.
Not even close. And the NAACP knew that. They were smart. They knew that achieving true equality meant tackling every aspect of discrimination. It wasn't just about schools.
Yeah, they were involved in so much more than just big court cases.
Oh, absolutely. They were on the ground, fighting for voting rights, pushing for laws to protect people from discrimination, working with other organizations to bring down segregation wherever they found it. It was a multi-pronged approach, for sure.
Okay, so you've got the NAACP meticulously building their case in the courts. Then you have the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the SCLC, bursting onto the scene with a very different strategy, nonviolent resistance. And of course, you can't talk about the SCLC without talking about Martin Luther King Jr. He was the heart and soul of that organization.
Absolutely. King and the SCLC, they were all about channeling Gandhi's teachings, showing the world the power of peaceful protest, even in the face of incredible brutality. And they drew their strength from the Black church. It was a powerful combination.
Yeah, and that contrast between their peaceful approach and the violence they faced. It's just mind-blowing. I mean, you think about Birmingham in 1963, those images of fire hoses and police dogs being turned on peaceful protesters, even children. It's heartbreaking, but also incredibly inspiring. Those people were unbelievably brave.
Totally. And those images from Birmingham, they were everywhere. People all across the country, they saw what was happening and they were outraged. It really forced America to confront the reality of segregation, and it led to a huge shift in public opinion. People who had been silent before, they started speaking out, demanding change. It was a turning point.
And it wasn't just Birmingham. You had those incredible freedom rides, people putting themselves on the line, literally riding into the heart of segregation on those interstate buses.
Right. Talk about brave. They were challenging those segregation laws head on, and they knew it was dangerous. Violence was a very real possibility.
Yeah.
But they did it anyway. They knew that sometimes you have to force the issue, make it impossible to ignore.
And they really did force the issue. Those freedom rides and those sit-ins, they showed just how unsustainable, how ridiculous those segregation laws were. They put pressure on businesses, they grabbed national attention, and they inspired countless others to stand up and say, enough.
They really did. It's amazing how such a simple act, just sitting at a lunch counter, could spark such a powerful movement. But it wasn't just about changing laws for SNCC.
It was about changing hearts and minds.
Yeah, exactly. It was about saying, hey, this system, this whole way of life built on segregation, it's unjust. It's got to go.
Hey.
But it's interesting, right? Because SNCC, they went through their own evolution, too. They started out completely committed to nonviolence, just like the SCLC.
But then they started to shift.
They did. Some of their leaders, like Stokely Carmichael, they started questioning the whole idea of integration. Like, is it really enough just to be allowed to sit at the white folks' lunch counter? Or do we need to create something totally different, something that reflects our own values, our own identity?
And that's a really crucial question, right? I mean, what does equality really mean? Is it just about access? Or is it about having the power to define your own destiny, your own future?
Exactly. And that's what was so pivotal about SNCC's shift towards Black power. It acknowledged that true equality meant not just integration, but self-determination. It meant embracing Black identity, Black pride, Black control over Black communities. It was a powerful message.
So from those incredible acts of nonviolent resistance, they started advocating for Black self-reliance, Black self-defense. It really goes to show you that movements are never static. They grow, they change, they adapt to the challenges they face.
Absolutely. And sometimes those changes lead to fractures, like with SNCC when they made the decision to expel their white members in 1966. That was a turning point.
And it makes sense, right? I mean, they were shifting toward this idea of Black power, of Black leadership, and the fight for Black liberation. And it highlighted this tension that often exists within movements, even those fighting for a common goal, this question of what's the best path forward.
Absolutely. And those disagreements, they could be painful, divisive even, but they also reflect a certain evolution of thought, a deeper understanding of the complexities of the fight for equality.
Right. And you see that playing out on a larger scale within the civil rights movement, too. While you have groups like the NAACP and the SCLC making these incredible strides, you also have this growing awareness of the limitations of integration, the persistence of systemic racism. And that's where a group like the Nation of Islam, the NOI, comes in. They offered a totally different path, one rooted in Black nationalism. And it was about more than just separation, wasn't it? It was about Black pride, Black self-reliance, rejecting the very systems that had been used to oppress Black people for centuries.
Exactly. It was a powerful message, and it really resonated with a lot of people, especially those who were frustrated by the slow pace of change, by the fact that even with legal victories like Brown v. Board and the Civil Rights Act, true equality seems so far away.
And when it comes to the NOI, you can't talk about them without talking about Malcolm X. He was such a powerful voice, charismatic, uncompromising. He really challenged people's ideas about the fight for equality.
Yeah, he wasn't afraid to shake things up, that's for sure. And his story is so interesting because it really reflects how thinking was evolving within the Black community at the time. Like early on, he was all about Black self-defense, right?
Totally different from King's message of nonviolence.
Right. It was like a different philosophy altogether. And for a lot of people, it really resonated. Because let's be real, turning the other cheek only goes so far, especially when you're facing the kind of relentless oppression that many Black people were facing at the time.
Absolutely. And man, those speeches, the way he could just call out hypocrisy wherever he saw it, it's no wonder he had such a huge impact.
Huge impact. It's just, it's tragic that his life was cut short.
It's heartbreaking, to think what he could have accomplished if he had lived longer. It makes you wonder how his message might have evolved.
Yeah. But even in death, his words were incredibly powerful, especially as the Black Power movement gained momentum.
It's like all these different approaches within the civil rights movement, they were all playing off each other, influencing each other, sometimes clashing, but also pushing each other forward, creating this incredible force for change.
Exactly. Like you said before, it was like a symphony. Each organization was playing its own part. And sure, maybe there was some dissonance sometimes, but it all built towards something amazing. And, we have to talk about the actual legislation that came out of this period.
Right. Like the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Talk about a landmark achievement. I mean, it outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, even national origin. It's hard to overstate how big of a deal that was.
It was enormous. And it didn't happen in a vacuum. It was the culmination of decades of struggle, of activism, of all these different groups fighting for change.
Absolutely. And then you have the Voting Rights Act of 1965, finally securing the right to vote for so many African Americans who had been denied that right for far too long. That's what it's all about, right? Making those rights real for everyone.
Exactly. It wasn't just about words on paper. It was about changing the very fabric of society.
So where does that leave us now? We've talked about so much the legal battles, the protests, this idea of Black power. What are the key takeaways here? What does it all mean for us today?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, the fight for equality is far from over, but I think these organizations, these leaders, they offer a roadmap for how to create change. They remind us that there's no one right way to do it.
It's about using all the tools at your disposal, right? Legal strategies, grassroots organizing, pushing for systemic change while also celebrating your own identity and demanding self-determination.
Exactly. And it's about knowing when to push harder, when to adapt, when to stand your ground no matter what. And, as you continue to explore this history, think about which of these approaches really speaks to you. Whose message would have resonated with you back then?
Ooh, that's a good one. It really makes you think, if we were in their shoes, what choices would we have made? It's easy to admire them from a distance, but it's different to imagine yourself in the middle of it all.
Totally. And that's what makes this history so compelling.
Yeah.
It's about connecting with the human stories behind it all, the courage, the sacrifices, because ultimately, the fight for social justice is a human fight.
That's a powerful thought. Well, this has been an incredible journey, and I have a feeling our listeners are going to want to keep exploring this history long after they finish listening. So, to everyone listening, thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope this conversation has given you a deeper understanding of just how complex and multifaceted the civil rights movement really was.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.